بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. First of all, I want to thank you for joining me today. We're continuing looking at some of these verses in the Quran that are really foundational to the Quranic narrative. We looked at taqwa and the concept of taqwa, which I think is one of the most foundational and important concepts in our tradition. It's a beautiful word, it's a comprehensive word, but with that word also comes another really important concept, and sometimes they're paired together in the Quran, and that is sabr. Sabr and shukr, gratitude, which I hope to talk about later. These are the two qualities that human beings are, it's absolutely necessary that they embody these qualities in their life. Life is essentially tragedy and comedy. These are the two great motifs in literature because this defines the very nature of life on earth. There's tragic elements, and comedic here doesn't mean funny, but rather happy situations. A comedy in classical theater is something that has a happy ending. So there's either tragedy or there's joy and bliss and happiness. When you're enjoying bliss and happiness, it's very important to be grateful. In fact, the word in Old English and coming out of the Latin actually is rooted in the idea of joy. That actually joyfulness is expressing a type of gratitude. Patience, however, is what we need more than anything, because life is tribulation, and life, if we look at our lives over time, we will see that there's an immense amount of tribulation in one average human life. And while it's very important, the highest station is gratitude. The station immediately under that, that's absolutely necessary for us to be aware of and to maintain in our lives, is patience. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually uses the word in the Quran in its various forms over 70 times. This is how central the idea of patience is. Isbiru wa sabiru. The Quran says, be patient and enjoin to patience. One of the great bounties of patience is that there are certain karamat or blessings that come from patience, and I hope to look at that. But today I want to look at the states that we find ourselves in. One of the great scholars of Egypt, Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari, who was more known for his tasawwuf, but he was also a masterful Maliki scholar. He has an opinion sometimes in some of the Maliki books. Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari went through a spiritual crisis at a certain time, and he went to his teacher, Abu Abbas al-Mursi, who was an extraordinary arif billah, somebody who really knew God in a very profound way. And he let him know that he was having these difficulties. And he said that his sheikh told him that you will always find yourself in one of four circumstances. And if you understand these four circumstances and the proper response, because life is essentially, in fact, the very definition of life biologically is that it responds to stimuli. So if something does not respond to stimuli, it's not considered living. So life is responses. This is how we determine somebody's alive. So he said there are four conditions that you're going to find yourself in, and there are four responses to those conditions. The first condition is blessing. To be alive is a great blessing. To have consciousness, to be healthy is a great blessing. If you begin to enumerate your blessings, you won't come to the end of it. وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you attempt to enumerate the blessings of Allah, you won't come to the end of them. And so the response to blessing is gratitude, shukr. And that's why it's so central. And Allah tells us, warns us really in the Quran, وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. Very few of my servants are continuously grateful. Because this is the highest station. The people closest to God are grateful even in their tribulations. In fact, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said that in every tribulation there are three blessings that you should be grateful for. One, it could have been worse. You lost one child, you could have lost all your children. You lost one arm, you could have lost both arms. You went blind, you could have gone deaf. So there's always that blessing that it could have been worse. The second is that it's in your dunya, your worldly matters, and not in your religious matters, your deen. If you lose $1 million and all you had was 800,000, so now you're $200,000 in debt, you still have your health. And there's people who have $1 million that are sick that would give you that $1 million if they could purchase your health. And so there's always something to be grateful of, and to recognize that worldly things are not, we can lose worldly things, but if we haven't lost our deen, it's a blessing. And finally, that it's in this world and not in the next. And that in and of itself is an immense blessing, because the real calamities are the calamities that will determine people's afterlife. So patience, gratitude is very important. But the second state is that you're in tribulation. And the response to tribulation is patience. So gratitude with blessings, patience in tribulation. The third state, he said, is that you're in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the response to that is to witness the tawfiq of Allah. In other words, the success that Allah has granted you in being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To see that had it not been for God, I wouldn't have been able to do this. And this prevents a type of arrogance from coming into the heart, to think that this is me doing it. C.S. Lewis, in his wonderful work, The Screwtape Letters, which is about one devil teaching a younger devil, his nephew, how to seduce people. He has a situation where he writes his uncle Screwtape, and he says, I'm in big trouble. He's starting to become pious. He's going to the church. And the older devil writes him and says, that's nothing to worry about. Just tell him how much better he is than other people. Just tell him what a pious person he is. In other words, pride. Once you instill pride in the heart of a believer, he's finished. Because arrogance is the one thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will abase it always. So that's something to keep in mind, that if you're blessed with being able to read a lot of Quran in Ramadan, to pray, to do all these things, see that as a blessing from Allah. And so that also demands gratitude, but witnessing the minnah, the gift of Allah in that. لا تمنوا علي إسلامكم بل الله يمن عليكم. Don't remind me that it's a blessing you've become Muslim. No, God reminds you that it's a blessing that He gave you Islam. That's in Surah Al-Fath. So that's, Al-Hujarat. So that's very important for us to keep that in mind. And finally, disobedience. And the response to disobedience is tawbah, is turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the four states that Abu Abbas mentioned to his students. And Ibn Ata'illah said that he felt like a mountain of weight was lifted from him in receiving that guidance. So it's a really extraordinary, great blessing to know the four conditions that we're going to find ourselves in and how to respond to them.